Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinars. My name is Amanullah Sand. I facilitate virtual programs at Teacher Development Webinars. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Teacher Development Webinars is a social action project to support teachers and educators around the world with professional development opportunities. It is an initiative using the rise in online professional development to connect people from around the world with opportunities which they may not have had due to the old normal of face-to-face conferences. And we celebrate International Mother Language Day webinar series that attempts to celebrate linguistic diversity and multilingualism. We intend to promote awareness of equity and inclusion in education. So about linguistic human rights, importance of mother tongues, language sensitization, and other concerns about language. Now, for this webinar, it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Ajay Pinjani. Ajay Pinjani leads a language-driven research project studying benefits of mother tongue and multilingualism in a child's journey. He has been actively associated with the education landscape of Pakistan, holding diverse portfolios and leadership positions. The driving question Ajay focuses on is strengthening of quality education, especially in the schooling years, navigating ways to ensure the benefits of education do not discriminate against children across a diverse set of endowments and entitlements. Founder of Tiknukta and educational consultancy, Ajay is an Acumen Fellow and a program designed to connect and cultivate a pipeline of a school chain of social change makers who are committed to tackling poverty and injustice in their communities. He holds a master's in social work from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, India. Ajay loves curating a curious and observant culture of learning where perspectives are shared, challenged, and directed. What a pleasure it is to have you at Teacher Development Webinars, Ajay. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinars.
Thank you, Amanullah. Thank you.
So the question and this the session of the format today is the format of the session today will be question and answers. You've already watched the video Ajay shared with us, and that spoke about his experiences and some of the wonderful stories he shared with us. So I like you to put your questions in the chat box straight away. But yeah, first of all, the questions we received was about MTBLE. So if you could talk about what it means and his perspectives about mother language based multilingual education.
Sure. Thank you, Amanullah. Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be part of you today, and those who are watching and those who will watch later, to all of you. This project, so basically, I think what you would have seen also in the video that we talk about languages and we talk about education, we talk about subjects. Many a times, these conversations are spoken about separately. We talk about subjects and growth separately. We talk about education for career separately. We talk about education for self and for self-growth separately, and then the role of language separately. But all of these things do not happen separately. They always happen in conjunction with each other. They always happen with each other at the same time. And there's so much happening in the mind of the child and in the mind of the educator. And the educator is also the child, and the educator is also the receiver. So there is a giver and receiver relationship, but it's more of a dialogue. It's more of a sharing of a similar space. Like right now, we are sharing one common space. And what we recognize that the power of language is phenomenal. And the power of language ensures that we are sharing a same space. Right now, if I'm speaking to you and I'm able to hear you and I'm able to understand you and you're able to comprehend me and experience the conversation I'm sharing, is because we're using a language which is common for all of us. So more than the role of mother tongue, it is the role of familiarity. As soon as I enter into a space which is strange to me, which is new to me, there are certain threads which must be common throughout, which connect me with this unfamiliar space. And that is language. And that is very, very, very true, especially at the earlier years when the child for the first time is entering into a school, which is a completely unfamiliar space. And language is that thread of identity, of community, of any construction to which the child gives an expression. And that's where the title of the project, where we entered into and dived into, it became Mother Tongue Based Multilingual Education, starting with the most familiar language and ensuring that we become a multilingual society where if my as a child as 5 years, if my zone of interaction right now is sitting with you all, I optimize that. And if I expect and aspire to be in a very different zone of interaction in the future, that is also optimized. So maybe the current one is optimized with the familiar language, and the additional environment which I want to optimize is the one which for which I need more multilingualism. I need additional languages, and that's why mother tongue based multilingual education. I hope I answered your question, Amara.
Wonderful. So that leads to me, leads me to our next question, which is around technology. We have seen this shift to technology in recent years, and a result of COVID-19 and this global change that schools suddenly shifted to the online medium of teaching. So, do you think that this MTVLE project can be aligned, with that, and how can we link it with technology? Have we got the sufficient resources to be implemented in that context?
So that's a beautiful question, Amanullah, because that generally does not arise in our conversations initially. But I'm glad that you started off with that question because technology has the power to accelerate certain aspects. Now, I love to connect with where we are today, where we are right now. It would have been inconceivable many years back, or at least a decade back, or 2 decades back, to sit like this, to have people from different parts of the world connected from their own rooms and their own spaces talking about something which concerns to them equally. That in itself is so magical. So, technology has tremendous power. However, technology alone has no value in itself. It is a medium. Like language in itself is a medium to express, it is a medium to receive. Similarly, technology is a medium that accelerates certain amounts of expression and that accelerates certain amounts of reception. So, where does the mother tongue based multilingual education align with technology and how does it assist? There are multiple fronts. Let me point out one of the major fronts, which is the stories. So when we talk about early years education, many a times we say that the script in that language is not available. In Pakistan, there are more than 70 plus languages which are spoken in houses, in homes, in localities. But when it comes to written language, even certain provincial languages do not necessarily have their script, which is official script, which everyone is familiar with. So there is a vacuum in terms of decision making which comes in that okay Ajay, we understand that mother tongue based multilingual education is very important at the age of 5. It's very important to begin with the most familiar language, but which script will we follow? What kind of script will we follow? And those questions become very paramount. While those questions are necessary, technology brings in aspect of solution with Pakistan Reading Project, Sindh Reading Project, and I'm sure in your own respective countries, there would be certain projects or initiatives, either community driven, state driven, or outside driven, whereby those local folklores, cultural stories have been, used through technology and documented, and now they're available as audio stories with graphics, with other aspects. And now those stories can really come into the early years education. It wouldn't be difficult to have those stories and audio stories and video stories to become part of that. Now, that's one place where technology can really bring shift. The second place is the script as well. Now, even the script which we write, the Nastaliq script, which we use, for Arabic and for Urdu and Sindhi and other languages. Now there are digital softwares whereby even certain languages, which might be spoken in Indian Punjabi or in Gurmukhi script or some other, they can be translated into other scripts. And thereby, there could be a script problem also, which has more exploration with technology one can visible. So I think technology has a lot of benefits, but they have to be very consciously utilized. One cannot see technology as the driver, but certainly technology as the mediator, as an influencer, as an intermediary to assist what the vision is, to assist what the program is.
Wonderful. So yeah, as we talk about mother tongue based multilingual education, I would like to know, have you conducted this research in, specific areas like in Sindh, the whole of Pakistan?
So there were two elements to it, in a way, four. So there's a research element, there's a design element, then there's an implementation stage, and then there's an evaluation stage. Now, generally, the evaluation which other countries have experienced and implemented are more longitudinal, because we want to see a 6 to 8 year journey of a student who has experienced mother tongue based multilingualism in comparison to a student who has not experienced mother tongue based multilingualism, and what is their impact on the social utility, cognitive utility, and the academic utility. By social, it's what they have experienced as an identity within their own self, their own personality, their own sense of identity within their own culture and in the larger world. By cognitive, what kind of comprehension, the adaptability towards how much they comprehend, and then the academic skills, how much they're well versed with the science subjects of science, mathematics, social studies, so on and so forth. Now, to achieve all of these, evaluation will be a 6 to 8 longitudinal journey. We have done the research. For that, we have identified more than 150 plus stakeholders, and we did a 1 year journey whereby we interviewed all of them, and there were linguists, policy influencers from Pakistan, from the province of Sindh where we were doing our pilot, and then from other parts of the world as well, who are esteemed linguists in their own fields of linguistics and multilingualism, especially. So after the research phase, we came to certain guiding principles. If you read the research report, which is available on the website of the Citizens Foundation, titled Mother Tongue Based Multilingual Education, if you look at that with TCF, you will find a research report as well. There are 65 guiding principles on the basis of, if you have to develop a community engagement program, what are the guiding principles? If you have to design evaluation, if you have to design teaching and learning materials, what are the guiding principles to follow? And very importantly, if I were to design in my own context a language ladder, which language should be taught first, which language should be taught after, and how would the gradual transition look from one language to another? That's where the guiding principles would be there. So I think we're convinced with the research part. Now, this is where the design and implementation come. And we have a partner organization, Thar Foundation, who has funded this project, the research project, as well as the design project. And in the Thar Foundation, within the Thar Parker region, there are certain schools which has been adopted, and that is where we are implementing our pilot right now. And the pilot is more incremental. There are some students in nursery, then KG, then grade 1 and grade 2. Right now, next year onwards, we will start implementation in grade 3 as well. So this is where the implementation phase is right now. And we are learning from the results. With COVID and other aspects, there has been a slow implementation, but we are gradually seeing the benefits of the mother tongue based multilingual education.
Great. So we talk about mother language based multilingual education, but Tasneem Shahnaz from India asked, she says that in a multilingual country like India, how will children communicate with people of other language states?
That's a beautiful question. That's a very, very important question, because while we see multilingualism as and diversity as a tremendous benefit, we are sometimes hindered by the thought that, if my child is learning the local language, how will they be able to speak and communicate with a student or with a person from another province? Now, that's where it has to be understood that the education landscape can be divided into multiple stages and multiple floorings in a way. So the first floor one can see is from nursery or the age of 5 till, grade 2. That age is very the zone of initial environment and communication is your own community, is your own neighborhood. Now, that is where the goals are distinct when we come talk about the second stage and the third stage, because the second stage is grade 3 to grade 8 or 7, and then the third stage is grade 7 to 10, and then the fourth stage can be talking about, entry into the university, where the zone of interaction tremendously changes. Now, if we divide our schooling journey into these four stages, the goal of the first stage would be to acquire the basic linguistic proficiency, conceptual understanding of aspects, and a sense of self in the identity, in the community, which is not distinguished, which is not keeping me isolated from the community, but slowly and gradually connecting me beyond my community as well. And that is where the role of mother tongue and the role of familiar language is tremendously profound. When we come to grade 2 to 5 or 3 to 6, this is where we talk about establishing academic utility in the subjects while using the familiar language as the basic medium. For example, we are studying science in the most familiar language so that we understand science, and we are not complicating or confronting language as well as science, because science is also unfamiliar to me, the language is also unfamiliar to me. That becomes a problem. But if the language is familiar to me and I'm studying science in the familiar language, what I need to learn is only the concepts. What I need to experience is those concepts in the practical day to day my life, and my language and my environment is the medium which is helping me do that, entering me into the unfamiliar world. When we talk about grade 6 to 8 and beyond that, that is where a gradual transition has to come across from the familiar language to the lesser familiar on the unfamiliar language. And this is where after this we expect our children to really interact with many children and many students and many people from other provinces. So with a gradual transition, this also can be taken into account.
Wonderful. So yeah, I see this question from Mahmoud Rasan in the chat, and he asks, does mother tongue help in learning and acquiring any language more than language of communication? What would be your say on it?
Sorry, can you repeat the question or the comment, please?
Yeah, he says, does mother tongue help in learning and acquiring any knowledge more than language of communication?
Does language help? Does mother tongue help
Yes,
in acquiring what?
acquiring. Could you see the chat, please? It's in the chat.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just give me a
Mhm.
second. The last question, yeah, by Mr. Nasser Mahmood.
Mahmoudul Hassan.
Okay, I think the earlier question. So I would have to still try to understand the question. So I'll reiterate what I've understood, and then maybe Mr. Mahmood, if you could then elaborate on that. So what I understand is that, is the mother tongue helping only to communicate in that mother tongue, or is it also helpful to acquire other languages? Is that the question?
I think
Uh,
what he means, yes, I think what he means to say is that, if we are having mother tongue in our context, is it more beneficial than, other languages of communication, like we may say English or
okay.
Urdu?
Makes
So yeah,
So I think what we first need to do in this question is to depoliticize language. Many a times, language within India, within Pakistan, within many other contexts, every context, language is a source of identity and is a tremendous source of identity. And that's why it has been tremendously politicized as well. And it has been considered a political tool of sometimes in some places of secession as well. So there is awareness of how much to give scope for a language to grow, because it may have other effects as well. But if we depoliticize language and we try to understand only from a child-centered perspective, which is difficult to do at a state level but very important to do as educators. Now, what does language do? What is mother tongue? Because when we depoliticize the term mother tongue, what is it? It is a language which I know. As a child, at the age of 5, at the age of 6, at the age of 4, it is a language through my mother, through my family, I have been able to first experience the world, Second, experience myself. And third, use that experience and use that language to communicate and to interact these two different worlds, the world and myself. Now, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful asset. It's something where I have learned to think and thereby to express and to communicate with the world. Now, as soon as the child enters the school, if we ignore this and if we say that the child has come with an empty slate, it is problematic. The child has never come with an empty slate. Now, we are also learning through scientific methods that even within the womb, in those 9 months, the child is learning. So there is no empty slate. With the concept of genealogy and genes and transfer, there is never an empty slate. So when the child is certainly entering at the age of 5 or 4 into a school, which is a completely unfamiliar space, language is that connect. Language is that thread. On the other hand, if we use the unfamiliar language, that thread is broken. It's like an unfamiliar space plus an unfamiliar medium. How would we feel entering into a party, entering into a social gathering where we have nobody whom we know, where nobody uses the language or the ethos or the culture or the clothing or the food we have experienced? It's something similar. Even today, we will feel awkward. Even today, when we walk into such a social gathering, we'll feel like we're not part of it. We're not welcome. We're not included. But we are able to communicate that anxiousness, that anxiety outside to a close friend or to a close family member. I don't need to go there. Otherwise, you come with me. Now, this is what is happening to a child who is unable to understand. So, the role of language is not about only language of communication at the early years. It is the only and the most powerful tool to connect with the wider world. I hope I've answered, but if there are leading questions around it or follow up, more than happy to converse.
Wonderful. It was wonderfully explained. So in this video we saw earlier, you talk about the power of stories, and indeed I shared one of the powerful stories, and throughout your life you faced. So yeah, we see this thing that as long as I'm similar, I'm like I'm accepted. But when I'm different, or I have my point of view, my belief is different, my faith is different, or something, my ideology. So a kind of this thing. So how can we, in a Pakistani context, do you think make it more inclusive and respect each other's opinion, and then we may say, rather on a bigger level, celebrate them?
Oh, so I'm loving where the conversation is going, because it's very important to ask the deeper questions. Language is not to make a career. Education is not to have a job. And what, Amanullah, through you, the questions I'm receiving from others is that we value that. We value that language or any other aspect of education, in my understanding, is to beautify three relationships. The relationship I have with myself, the relationship I have with you, who is the other for me, the relationship which I carry with the earth, with the planet, which we all carry together, with the water cycle, with the wildlife, with the animals, with any other aspect of the earth and the universe. Now, there are these three relationships. If they are balanced, our life, as well as our relationships, as well as the earth's balance and life will be balanced and will be beautiful. Now, to do that, we have to accept the differences. I think what is happening is we fear differences. So it's much more about language. It's much more about language. It's much more than language. It is the internal insecurity that if somebody is different, it's problematic. If I don't know something, I cannot relate to it, I cannot understand it, thereby I will never accept it. We have to move away from tolerance. This word is so tremendously problematic. Many a times we say interfaith harmony, but we use the word tolerance. In our day-to-day conversations, if my friend comes to me and say, I am tolerating you, I don't know how you would feel, but I would feel pathetic. What do you mean by you're tolerating me? What do you mean by you're tolerating my presence? Of course, I demand more. I demand acceptance. And I demand acceptance not because I am like you, but because I am who I am. And I am equally gifted with this cherishment of life and breath as you are. So I think the conversation has to go beyond language, careers, jobs. And if I try to understand and shift, put mother tongue based multilingual in this, it is at the center of it. When in one of the books I read, when Gandhi was studying English and the medium instruction became English, it was, he at one point said that I feel there is a kind of a superiority complex which has come into me, whereby I'm not able to associate with my own parents because they don't speak the language, which is the language of authority, which is the language which is official. And that gap, it took a lot of time, a lot of consciousness, a lot of reflection to cut off that gap. I don't know how many of us feel that, because language is tremendous power. So which language give, which whom we gave social status, economic status, political status, drive the decisions of how we perceive language. There are many provinces and there are many individuals who do not appreciate their own language. They feel speaking to that speaking in that language is compromising my sense of self. But they can't speak in any other language, and that's why this insecurity and imbalance is tremendously problematic for the earth. So there is hope, there is possibility, but we have to respect differences, not because we understand them, because they exist, and because we know that when they exist, my culture, my life is also equally as different as yours. So if I respect mine, I respect the others.
Very well said. Wonderful. And coming back to this concept of mother language based education, MTBLE, what I understand and what you said about it, I think it's more about additive bilingualism. We say maybe start with your most familiar language. In most cases, is mother tongue, and then afterwards, when child develops this faculty of learning, then you can go on adding as many languages as you could, teach English, and if interested in more languages, maybe French or German and other contexts. So yeah, so I think we're talking about it, and not we don't say that we have to cut off from the world, and we do acknowledge and accept that the power and the use English language has. As we are interested in this very session, we talk in English to reach the wider community and to acknowledge and have perspectives shared with the wider world. So yeah.
No, rightly put, Amanullah. So let's use the analogy which we are more familiar with, because the whole point is going from familiar to unfamiliar, right? So even let's use the analogy which we are more familiar with. In my culture, in my, I'm from a Sindhi family. When I wake up, I have different kinds of breakfast. I do have omelette, but that was never the main source of breakfast. So I had different kinds of breakfast, something made of wheat, something made of rice. And when I go into another zone of interaction, when I go into another country, in another society, I eat that breakfast as well. When I went to study in Turkey, I started eating cheese and, the bread where the cheese is placed in it. And there would be salad within the breakfast, which I was not familiar with. Now, if I look at my age of 35, I've traveled to US, traveled to Turkey, traveled to India, been in Pakistan, many different places, I have a different repository of breakfast, different repository of food. Nothing is bad, nothing is great, nothing is over another. Everything is different, yet everything is beautiful. And everything is beautiful at its own time and its own place in its own space. So there is nothing, it's an additive model. I think the same additive model applies to language. We never let go of what we've learned. We only let go when we think it's bad. And that also we don't let go, we hide. So I think what we are doing when we are politicizing language, when we are politicizing certain aspects, when we are saying me as myself is not worth it, I'm not good enough with what I have, there's a lot of commercialization aspect which has come in, and that's where the goal, all these questions will come down to the journey of differentiation between process versus product. The entire schooling model today, Amanullah, and everyone else has been built up grade 1 to grade 2, grade 3 to grade 4. So basically, what does it mean? A grade 1 child is being told that if you're in grade 1, that's not good enough. You must be in grade 2. If you're in grade 2, that is not good enough. You must be in grade 3. And you can be with me on this, that this journey is never ending. Because now, if you're a PhD, you need to be a postdoc. If you're a postdoc, you need to be this job. If this job, to be that job. So basically, we are always looking after tomorrow, whereby there is no tomorrow. There is never a tomorrow. The breath or the conversation which I spoke 5 minutes back was 5 minutes back, it's gone. What is to come after a minute, it will come after a minute. That is not there. What is there is right now, what I'm speaking to you, what you're hearing to me. If we are unable to cherish what we have right now in front of us, what we are experiencing, with the wholesomeness, not only about our mind, which is only the imaginative component sometimes, but also the body, the feeling, the experience, we'll be able to cherish everything. And it is an additive model. Every aspect of life is an additive model. So language will be similar. It will also be an additive model, not a subtractive model.
Wonderful. And I can relate to it, when I did my BAs and then, and now I'm doing my MPhil. So yeah, this journey, goes on. But yeah, we've got an interesting question and it's about TCF. So there was a language activist a couple of years ago protesting that TCF schools, they are advocating like leaving your own language out of the boundary walls of the school, and the whole of the focus was on Urdu, which of course is again a national language. So I guess back then this research was not implemented or not, this work on empty belly was not done. But do you think that things have changed over the years? Your take on it?
So tremendously evolved. And I wouldn't go back into the history to say that what exactly happened. I think there would be different versions. The version or the perspective which is dominant, which I've always connected with TCF, is that, to build schools in the most familiar language requires a lot of capacity. Requires a lot of capacity, a quite of cost constraints, other aspects, because to teach in a familiar language, so on and so forth, is heavy investment in that sense. So I think the idea, the value of familiar language was always there. If it was not there, Urdu would also not have been in there. Because Urdu is the common language, and that's why this was in the forefront. And English is the unfamiliar language, not only for the students, but also for the teachers. So if your teachers and students both are struggling, what benefit does it give if to keep a book in English or in French or in another language? It does not make sense. So I think the ethos was always familiarity. The constraint was capacity, and thereby the research to go ahead with it. And now with the recent research, with the recent understanding, it's really, and with technological shift also. And now with the 25-year-old journey, now the access is being shifted to also quality with access. Because earlier, one of the major challenges with 25 million children still out of schools, the major challenge in Pakistan is access. But of course, access without quality is useless. As we are seeing right now, 17 plus million children are in schools. Primary of them are around in 5 million. And with Acer reports, as we see of this year and last year, Majority of them are struggling to read and write in all three languages: their familiar one, their or four languages, their national one or the local one, and then the international language, which is the official language. So quality with access is only the way out. And in the earlier years, that is sets the foundation. So I think to answer your question, TCF is certainly headed that way. And right now, as we are learning from this research and the fruition of that result, we're trying to scale that across different parts of Sindh as well. Now, in different parts of the country, it depends how much the state is also ready to accept. Because, in the province of Punjab, in the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Balochistan, the state readiness must also be a very key stakeholder to understand whether this language can be adopted as a medium instruction or not. Those conversations are also going and hopefully will materialize.
That's great. Part of the reason why I wanted to bring Ajay Naviwala on this the different time zones. So yeah, she has done this work and report as part of Wilson College, and she brought about things that we often talk about funding in education, but we are investing heavily in education, government, and then other organizations. They are doing it, but we only talk about the children out of the school. How about those children who are in schools? Are they learning? Our main focus, our concern should be those. And in our research, why Pakistani children can't read, she points out to these things. And I think one of the reasons is that at initial age we are introduced to this language, and had it been in our own language, a familiar language, other language, the results would have been quite different, I guess.
So, yes, this is a very profound question. Thank you for asking. When there is a problem of access and when there is a problem of quality, when you have to decide to put money, to put investment, to put capacity, where do you place that money? Where do you place that strength, which is already limited also? I think every child matters, but what does matter mean? That is also need to be questioned. Just putting children in schools does not really make a lot of difference. No. And it does not even necessitate the condition that children should be in school, because the whole experiment, it is an experiment. Schooling is an experiment. And it is only a 200-year-old experiment. And in countries like ours, it is only a less than a 100-year-old experiment. So this is an experiment with human civilization being there for millions of years. A less than 100-year schooling concept is an experiment. We need to see that from that dimension. But this experiment is based on certain hypotheses. And the hypothesis is that school is a safe space, that school is a learning space, that school is where familiarity and unfamiliarity are merged beautifully and gradually. And if these basic conditions for which the school is developed is not being met, there is no use to put children in schools. Sometimes we do that because we have an absent of an alternative. So we say, okay, put them. But I don't have answers to this, but I do have my nuances and thought process around it. That's very important to talk about quality with access, but also define quality. And in my understanding now, which I'm emerging, quality is not learning maths or learning science. Quality is to ensure that it is a safe space for a child and a space for growth. Safety first, growth second. If I don't feel safe to communicate in front of you, how do you expect me to grow? If you do not feel even the need or feel even the safety of the emotional safety, physical safety first, but emotional safety, that you feel included. And if you don't feel included, why will you converse? And if you won't converse, why will you engage in a dialogue which is unfamiliar? Because unfamiliar is anyways uncomfortable. It's like going to a social gathering where you don't know anyone. So for the first time, if you're learning science, it is like going to that social gathering. You need friends with you. And that friend is a language. That friend is that comfortable teacher. That friend is Sometimes that space has to be reorganized because benches and chairs and tables are not the safe space. If I have lived my life, which has not been in chairs and benches and tables, and I move around at the age of 5 and 6, suddenly for 8 hours, I'm trapped in a chair. And the teacher is changing, and another teacher is coming, and another teacher is coming, or one teacher remains. That does not make sense. I like to move. So that's also safety. So I think we need to redefine what does safe space mean, and then hope that if a child feels safe, and if there is with Vygotsky's understanding, and there's so many now, zone of proximal development, if the child right now is stepping this much and we can extend that, and while we also become a learner as an educator and not a teacher who is instructing, I think we all will grow. So safety is very important and growth is very important. It's not about only access. Access for what?
Wonderful, very much endorsed, Ajay. And there's an interesting question to follow up, and it says, "Do you think we see critical thinking as 21st, as very important 21st century skill? And do you think critical thinking is possible in some other language at initial age?
So I think there are two parts of the question, Amarullah. One is an assumption and one is a question. But because it's an assumption, I'll take that as a question. The assumption is critical thinking is a 21st century skill or a very important 21st century skill. And thereby, what is the role of language in giving critical thinking or so on and so forth. So let us go back to the first question first, because that was an assumption. I'll convert it into a question. That means our forefathers, everyone else in human society, and forget human society, in animals are not critical thinkers. What is critical thinking? So let me walk through an example. When did we get to know as human civilization that Earth is round? When did we get to know that Moon is round? Moon is round was visible, but that is not equal to Earth is round, because not everything is round, right? There are stars which are round in a fact, but they don't look round to us. There's so birds which are not round. There's everything. So there's so much of information around it. But if you ask this question around civilizations and people, they'd be like, maybe the first time somebody entered to the moon and that Neil Armstrong went, and then that's how we got to know from outside and we say Earth is round. Because if you and I sit down to draw the Earth right now, we will be drawing a semicircle. Because wherever we go, we will see a horizon. So thereby, we will see the sky meeting at the end of our horizon, our sight, and starting as well. And the natural coincidence would be that we'll draw a semicircle. We'll never be able to draw the Earth as round. But there have been these discoveries, these efforts, these questions, due to which, even if you read Anaksi Mandir, the story of Anaksi Mandir, in Anaksi Mandir, I say it in a local accent, but Anaksi Mandir or whoever you want to call it, go read that story and you'll find that this was identified in 350 BC or somewhere close by. So around 350 BC, where we had no equipments which we are privy to today, we knew that the Earth is round. And we not only knew that the Earth is round, we had also measured to a great amount of accuracy. So critical thinking is not a 21st century skill. And critical thinking is not a skill which will be learned. Because it's not a 21st century skill, we are very privileged that it's been passed on from our genes. It's there. The term education, if we Google it today, the Latin term, which is the origin of education, is educere, E-D-U-C-E-R-E. And the term educere means to bring forth from within. When I was in Cyprus and I learned about this term, I was dumbfounded, because throughout my education, I had failed in many subjects and I was taught that I did not know these subjects. Now, when you look at educare, it means it has nothing to do with outside, to bring forth from within. So right now, whatever I'm sharing, maybe the information, some bits of information might be new to you, but all the connections you're making to your own familiar knowledge, your own familiar experience is what you are doing. I'm not doing it. I am at best through my dialogue, through my actions, through my body language, through my communication, is creating a safe space of growth whereby you feel safe and you connect with your own self and your own experiences and your own feelings and bring out. And that is education. So that is critical thinking. Critical thinking is within us. Now, if then this question, and now the assumption changes, right? It's not 21st century, it's there. It has been there since children are born. Each one of us has critical thinking. If we don't think critically, I don't think we can even learn a language. How can you learn a language which is so unfamiliar? Right now, if I start to learn Persian or French, it takes me so much time, requires so much critical thinking. But children learn that. Children learn everything about life. We all have been children, or we all are children. So critical thinking is built in. What does mother tongue do? Is the same thing. It creates that safe space. It creates that space of growth. It creates that space of joy. It creates the space of familiarity to learn the things which are unfamiliar to us, to ask and connect between the familiar and the unfamiliar, and thereby think critically. I think the question is whether the children express their critical thinking when familiar language is used. The higher chances are yes. When it is an unfamiliar language, they wouldn't even consider the space worthy to share their thought, forget the criticality of that thought. And they wouldn't know what they are missing, and we wouldn't know what we are missing.
Thanks very much. That was so profound. Thanks for saying that. And at this point, I was wondering if you were able to take on board some psychologists and do experiments with children on MTBLE, have a specialist point of view, what psychology says about it.
So I think in the phase of research, we did enter into that domain because all the linguists, have certain backgrounds in psychology, or they're familiar with that. All the research in the West or different parts of the world has been done with a lot of psychological domain placed within the research ambit. So we borrowed that research a lot rather than experimenting. Nor did we have the capacity, nor the tools, nor the depth of insight around that. So we borrowed that understanding. To give you an example, what does borrow mean? There is a very well-known scholar in linguists, Jim Cummins, and his theory of common underlying proficiency. Now, common underlying proficiency says what? And then it's commonsensical as well, if you apply it. So what does that mean? It means that if I start with learning a language which is Sindhi, which is my formal language, my familiar language, and I have understood the script within that language, the grammar, the syntax, every aspect of it. When I start learning English effectively, and effectively is very important because we don't learn effectively. But when I learn that language effectively in a safe space by a person who knows that language, I'll be able to easily transition. Why? Because my base will be mazboot, will be, thorough. It's something like maths, and Khan Academy and Salman Khan says that we are building maths by saying that our roof should be built, but our base should be weak. If our base is weak, how will the roof stand? But we are doing that each day. We are passing students on 33%. Today, even for our teachers, we are passing teachers to become teachers at 33 score for hard-driven economies and hard-driven places. It's ridiculous. If you pass somebody on 33, you're saying it's okay to have a floor but not a washroom, or to have a floor without good pipelines. So that's what we are doing. So there's a problem. We have to set the base correctly. And that's what language does, so.
Great, wonderful. And we're not doing it effectively. I recall, Sam Thor from, you have been, working with Zubeda Mustafa as well, and we have been reading her, and what she advocates about mother tongue is also the same, that learning mother tongue, and we're learning English, and we are so, in our heads of this prestige and thinking ourselves highly of that we talk in English. But the irony is we don't even, make sense of it. We don't even I speak in correct English. So yeah.
So I think the first thing to reckon is accept what is. I think we fail to do that. We do not accept that 17 million of our children are struggling to read and write in any language. We do not accept that our current teachers may not in scale have the capacity to teach in an unfamiliar language. We do not accept that the languages we have is diversity and is beauty. It has tremendous cultural repertoire, folklore, and tremendous power to teach whatever we have learned and our parents have learned. We do not accept many things as it is. Second, do we have the courage to imagine beyond the known?
Very well
That's
said.
very
And
important.
mhm,
Innovation is value addition. Value addition is an addition to the value you already have. So, first accept there's a value and then add on to it. And you add by having courage to imagine. So, when the policymakers, the influencers, the educators are failing to imagine, to trust, to be secure in their imagination and their capacity, how do we expect a society to be imaginative, to be curious, to be courageous, to be discovery oriented? It has nothing to do with language. There are further many paramount social challenges. The way we think is the problem. And if we are able to shift that perspective, I think there is a lot of scope. There's a lot of possibilities.
that makes sense. So Noshin from Bangladesh, and she asked, what's your opinion about language extinction and how can we stop language getting extincted? Does linguistic diversity always help in increasing multiculturalism in a country, or there is any negative effect to it?
So I'm certainly not an expert or do not have a lot of knowledge around this aspect, but I can share my opinion and perspective because we think from a child-centered perspective and the role of familiar language, so on and so forth. Now, what does language extension mean? What does any extinction mean? It takes years and centuries for something, for some idea to take a form, and for that form to become part of day-to-day life. Now, when it becomes day-to-day life, it becomes an essential source to communicate, to receive, and to express poetry, knowledge, culture, every other aspect. When the language is becoming extinct, it's not the language that is becoming extinct. It is that entire repertoire of that culture, that repository of evolution which has happened is becoming extinct.
Mhm.
Is
Interesting
that
question
human
from,
ingenuity which is being extinct? Gee, sorry.
yep.
So is that human ingenuity, the beauty of that collective critical thinking and acceptance which is being extinct? So I think we should all be worried about it. Right now, what we have said is we don't care about it. And if those who care, we'll call them you're backward, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your children's time, you're trying to be at that end like our forefathers, you're not going forward. How do you cut off your threads and then go forward? And thereby, where are you going if that thread is cut off? So I think there are more profound questions to be asked. I don't know, the linguist may be better placed to answer your question in particular, but from my perspective, it is tremendous amount of innovation and culture we are missing out with every aspect, and every day there are many languages being extinct to my knowledge.
I agree. First, in two webinars, one from Dr. Sadaf Munshi on language documentation, and one from Dr. Sarah Thompson, and on language death and kind of these areas would answer your question and better notion. So you can watch the recording at the Teacher Development Webinars YouTube channel. And there's whole list of the webinars in our International Mother Language Webinar Series playlist. So it would be helpful, I think. But yeah, this question is very important by Hafsa Sardar, and she says, would it not be hard for the child to acquire second and third languages later on in age if we teach keeping mother tongue as a medium till fifth grade? Also, what about the jargon relevant to a particular subject? How would we explain terms and concepts if the idea is borrowed from another language which is not in mother tongue, that does not exist?
Hmm. So there are two very important questions. Now, to answer the first question, because we discussed about the common underlying proficiency, we discussed about the bridge the familiar language creates while the second language or the unfamiliar language is taught effectively. I think the major problem today is not that an unfamiliar language, the bridge is not being developed accurately in terms of from the familiar to unfamiliar. The biggest challenge is both the familiar language and the unfamiliar language are not being taught effectively. That's the first presumption. One can't go around it. Not any adaptive learning can figure that out. There's a technical strength. Sindhi has to be taught effectively. English has to be taught effectively. And the English linguists, Sindhi linguists, and Urdu linguists have to come on board with the government, with other organizations to figure this out, how they are taught effectively. I think unless that condition is not met, any of the theories will fall flat. So that's one premise, very important. Now, once that premise is developed, then the second aspect is yes, the research is consecutively, continuously sharing with longitudinal studies. If you'll study the different linguistics from, especially from SIL, Summer Institute of Linguistics, they've done tremendous research across multiple indigenous and national languages and local languages. And they say even after 4 or 5 years, if you have, that's better for the child. Even if you introduce English at grade 2, grade 3, and then gradually transition, that's better for the child. It wouldn't be tough. It wouldn't be difficult. It may be vice versa, very difficult if they don't know, if they're struggling to understand gravity as well as what does gravity mean. You know, if they know what does gravity mean, and the all the reference points to understand gravity, which is earth, which is sun, which is, the concept of mass, the concept of weight, everything is understood, and then they're understanding gravity. Only one thing is unfamiliar, rest is familiar. Now what we do is a struggle. The teacher is making them copy and paste in English later on for the examinations, but everything else is being taught in Sindhi, but they don't know what to expect when they are to deliver their results or to express. So there's a tremendous amount of confusion. There's a second question about the academic words. Now, that's where purity is another subject of linguists. We're not advocating for purity of a language. We're advocating for child centered learning and using language for child centered learning, which is language which is familiar. Now, if I say table more effectively, rather than the Urdu word of it or Sindhi word of it, it's okay to use that word and have bilingualism rooted into it. And that's where the gradual transition is very important. In the science and social studies and mathematics, it's very important if you're transitioning from Sindhi to English or from your local language to English, take the years grade 4 to grade 7 as gradually transitioning. For that, the academic terminologies of certain concepts, it is maybe best to use it in English already, or certainly in both languages if you want to have the purity of that language as well, and also introduce English or reintroduce English which is already there in the academy. So I think there's a lot of experimentation which needs to be done over there. The principles would say gradually transition rather than transition as a jump, which most of us have experienced.
Great. I recall this debate among our professors, and one said, I prefer my children to go in elite school because for English, the earlier the better. And the other thing is because later on they won't be able to make it, and there'll be, socialization and kind of these things. So, the other professor replied that, where did you study? And he said, of course, in government school. And he said, don't you know English? And he said, I know, I have a PhD in English. So you have, made it to that level. You have PhD, and you started from a government school. Why you think, your children won't, be able to make it? So it's a kind of this debate, but I know we're short of time, and it's 1 o'clock already. So that I think one last question and to you. So, what would you say that have we done justice with the role of language in education in Pakistan?
Of course not. Of course not. I think justice is first acknowledging that there are many languages, thereby there are many cultures, thereby there are many identities. Accepting that many identities do not compromise the unified identity. Acknowledging and accepting that many cultures means many repositories of ways of living, of ways of experiencing life as we know and as we don't know. Acknowledging that this diversity is a gift by nature, by God, by whoever you believe in, by whoever you feel drives this earth and the beings. It's a gift. And that gift, our responsibility as policy influencers, as innovators, educators, is not to change the premise, is to cherish that premise, is to use that premise to ensure that there is best every person is happy in their present, is joyful in their present, and trust that if you're joyful in your present, you will be joyful in your future as well. Put things into place for future zone of interaction, but not at the cost of what they're experiencing today. Joy does not mean make things easy or difficult for them. Difficult does not mean it's engaging. Joy means it's engaging. Engaging means it's you're looking towards it through curiosity and towards the lens of discovery. And then things will happen. We don't all have a single purpose of life. And whoever has tried to pose a single purpose of life, we've led to wars and conflicts and killing each other. So let's forget about single language or single purpose of life. Just try to experience life as it is with joy and engagement. And language plays a tremendous role, their own culture.
Thank you so much, Ajay. It was wonderful to have you at Teacher Development webinars, especially as a part of our Mother and Teacher webinar series. And we really appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this conversation today. Uh, your questions were very profound and they really
Yes, I
helped me.
know. Yes, I know some of them, unanswered, and this is a long debate, and we want to do justice in another session. If when we are talking about this news panel and long discussion, but I'm happy that we were able to, have all these issues around, and we started this thing. So yeah, appreciate that.
Thank you. Have a
Thanks
lovely
very
day.
much for your Thank you very much for your participation, everyone. If you're interested in obtaining certificate for this session, you can email at info.tdwebinars@gmail.com. The recording for this session will be available on the webinars YouTube channel. Feel free to share with colleagues you think would like. And for our future webinars, please visit our website www.tdwebinars.org. Don't forget to share your takeaways from this session, and don't forget to tag us at TD Webinars using hashtag TD Webinars. We're available on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and our Facebook page. So yeah, all of our future sessions updates will be shared on our social media pages. Thank you